Thanks for joining us for this quarterly performance office hours. Appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. Looks like we've got quite a few people joining. Most of you I recognize the names of. A few are new still, trying to get familiar with some of our incoming performance people. Maybe some of you are from the negotiation teams that I'm not as familiar with as well. So really good to see some new names and faces coming through. I am going to go ahead and turn my camera off. I can see it's glaring off my glasses quite a bit, and that's probably distracting to everyone else, and I know it is for me. So we'll get started with a little bit of housekeeping as we always do. Generally, we run a couple polls, but we don't need to do that today, knowing this is a performance-specific office hours discussion. But if you do have any comments or questions while the presentation is going on, please let us know in the chat. Post those. We'll try to answer those in a timely manner or when it's most appropriate based on the material we're presenting today. We will share this PowerPoint near the end of the presentation. It's a lot of Q&A stuff, so it's easier to go through it and see if you have any questions before we share it and get ahead of ourselves there. You can raise your hand if you want to open up your mic and speak to us any particular time, but we will take questions a couple times during the session. So if you want to wait till that appropriate time, that's fine as well. As always, I've got Paula here today joining us as our performance specialist to answer some of your questions and present some of the information. I'm Mark Burgess as the performance manager here with the Office of Employment and Training at DCEO. So again, thank you for joining us. We'll get started with the information. Our agenda today is just really give you an opportunity to hear a little bit more about the performance negotiations that will be ongoing starting next week all the way through the end of September. We've started receiving some of your proposal forms, so we wanted to respond to some of the questions we received with those and prior to those actually. We want to give you a few tips, so we'll show you some screens or some captures from the negotiation tool. If after we're done showing this, we have questions about the tool itself, I can pull that up and share it, and we can go through a couple of those screens directly. We want to make sure you do have opportunity to ask any additional questions as you prepare those. Anyone that has submitted your proposals already, if information today maybe changes your thinking in what you proposed, you can certainly resubmit, take another consideration and resubmit those to us. Let us know immediately if you think you're going to do that so that we can, if you've already scheduled your meeting, we can take a look and see if that might be affected by it. But again, if you've submitted or close to getting those signatures, please take this information into consideration. We apologize that we didn't get it out beforehand, but some of it, as usual, is predicated on you providing us questions after we presented previously. And then Paula's going to go over a few policy tips related to reporting and directly related to performance as well. So we'll finish the day there. Just a little recap of where we've been. I know we had a webinar a couple weeks back on July 31st, but before that, we did have some presentations. Andy Blank from Northern Illinois University did a couple sessions on the negotiation tool in conjunction with all the work that work group around the statistical adjustment model, all the input all of you on that group provided him. We released the tool mid-July, so you had a couple weeks to take a look at that. We did get a few comments back from that and have updated the tool accordingly. Many of you may not have even noticed it. Some of it was just some placement of information, but it's up to date now. So if you're still looking at that, you should have the most current information it is showing. We did that webinar on July 31st. So if you haven't seen that and need more information, you'll want to go out to the ICSPS or the Illinois WorkNet sites where webinar recordings are housed. I'll give you that link here in a little bit later in the presentation. From there, we started asking for your proposals, and so we started receiving some of those. And actually, before we did that, and started receiving those, we issued a Q&A document. It was updated from the prior year negotiations back in program year 22-23. So many of the questions and responses are the same, but we did update a few and added several more. We may update that document with a couple more questions based on what we're presenting today or what we hear from all of you. So this may be another document update you'll want to take a look at if you haven't already submitted, or if you've submitted and you're preparing for negotiations, because that document includes all phases of negotiation, not just planning for the proposals. We're here today on August 21st with a little bit of update in the office hours, and then finally we'll be doing those negotiations throughout the next 5 weeks. So I look forward to talking to all of you in those and coming to some agreements. So we'll jump into some of the Q&A that is new and somewhat repetitive to some, because we did pull some of the questions that people had further follow-up with us, and so we wanted to share that with everyone. What is the local negotiation tool? Where can I access it? There's a link here, so once you get the PDF shared later, you'll be able to click on that. You'll be able to go out there and look at all of your historical information, the simulated performance scores, the rankings, and a lot of other information that Andy at NIU has provided in that to help you prepare for these negotiations. It talks about 3 of the 4 factors that you must use in negotiating, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as well in a future slide. Talks a little bit about that statistical adjustment model and how it relates to the simulated scores in calculating those as we come up on these next round of negotiations. And then again, it provides you the rankings for PY 2022 outcomes. We don't have 2023 finalized yet, so we couldn't provide those rankings, but you all have access in the Illinois Workforce Development System, in Illinois Performance Accountability and Transparency System, or the Career Connect system, where you can go in and see your performance for PY 23. And for the most part, those are complete, but some people are still getting some inputs into the system from the services and activities that occurred in late June. Or that maybe you weren't informed of until early to mid July. So keep updating that information prior to us submitting final PY 23 reports to Department of Labor in mid-September. Paula will talk to that a little bit as well. Okay, so someone said my slide's not progressing. Just a second. We'll quickly jump through these. Sorry about that. Thanks for sharing that, Cindy. Again, the agenda here I spoke to, and in the kind of the timeline we've gone through. Everyone's familiar with this. I won't spend too much time letting you see this, but it does speak to what's been going on. And here we are there at the very bottom, where we're presenting some additional information today and preparing for negotiations. So that first question is about the negotiation tool. You can also go to that recording that I mentioned that occurred of the webinar on July 31st. The links at the very bottom will provide you access to either one of those websites to view the recording and get the PowerPoint presentation that was associated with it. All right, so next question is, how should a local workforce investment board and their negotiation team consider their past negotiated goals in submitting new proposals? We probably should have added this when we did that webinar, because this did come up back in program year 22 discussions that some people were submitting the exact same proposals for some or all of the goals, all of the indicators of performance for the next 2 program year cycle. And in all honesty, what you negotiated 2 years ago has very little relevance about what you should negotiate this time around. When we negotiated 2 years ago, you had information from a 2 to 4 year period of time that was recent at that time, but is not as relevant today. While we provide you a historical reference of your outcomes for the past 6 to 7 years in the tool, really only the most recent years are the most relevant when you're thinking about what you should propose for program years 24 and 25. So don't get fixated on what you negotiated last time and think you should negotiate at or even near. You really need to look at what your history says, what your outcomes have been, how you've been able to reach those negotiations in the past, and also what other factors you're considering when you want to put together those proposals. So be careful and mindful of that, and don't set yourself up for a difficult negotiation because there's a large gap between what you might propose because you've simply taken last proposals and negotiated goals and copied them into this year's proposals. And we don't want to be crass about that and saying that, but it's really being honest in the fact that we need to look at your most recent program years as the strongest factors in what you need to include in your discussions and finally your proposals and the upcoming negotiations. I'm going to show you several slides with some screen captures of the tool itself to kind of give you some other tips on what you might want to consider as you're looking at all this information. And there'll be different scenarios that are included. So in this scenario, we have a simulated score there in the third column of data in the blue, 3 rows of blue. I've highlighted, it still isn't.
Mark.
So apologize. Yeah, I don't.
Mark, yeah, there we go.
I don't know why we're not moving along today. I don't know what's going on with it. Let me try something different. This might do it. Okay. So here we are showing you just a sample of what one of the local areas second quarter employment rates look like for all 3 programs. And you'll see in the third column there the simulated performance. In this scenario, the simulated performance is quite low compared to both the goal negotiated back in program year 22 and 23, as well as the actual outcome for the last complete program year PY 22. And someone says, might think, well, if that's a simulated score, should I submit that as my proposed goals? And again, as I just mentioned, you really need to look at that history, and then lower you see several years of history for this same measure for this adult program, where all of these are well above 80%. So the simulations, and Andy explains this fairly well in the tool itself on some of the narrative pages. The simulation takes data from the participant characteristics, the economic conditions, and PY22 to create a simulation. Sometimes these are a little bit, seem a little bit out of whack, if you will, compared to what your outcomes have been historically. That's because sometimes the data just doesn't say and give the full picture. Maybe there's limited amount of data if you're a smaller local area, or you just had limited number of participants in the participant pool for that measure for that program year. And so it doesn't come out quite exactly like you think it should if you're looking at your history. So the simulations are there. We're required to provide them to you. Again, we had a work group of many of you at the local level helping Andy and Brian Richard at Northern Illinois develop the statistical adjustment model and ultimately this tool. So we've done a great job. I think it's not perfect. We understand that. We'll continue to grow in understanding of how we can make these calculations and improve on this tool. But going into this year, which is the first year we have these for you in proposing goals and doing the negotiations, we've done as good as we can. And you'll see the other 2 measures here. One's a little bit off again from the actual, but not too far off of the goal. And the other one is pretty close to both the actual and goal. And so again, it's 1 factor of 4 or any additional information you want to submit as supporting information. So take it lightly or however you feel you need to, that simulated performance, but really focus on those actuals as much as anything. And so in this case, without knowing all the other factors, you would expect that maybe this negotiation would be closer to 80 or maybe a little bit above 80% rather than the 76.2% the simulation presents. And then again, we give you the state goal so that you can see how you, as a local board and local area administrators, how you help us as a state achieve our goals. So when you historically see that you're above our goals, that means you've been helping us tremendously over the years. And everyone, I've said this many times, everyone is different in their economic conditions and participant pool. And so we're going to have some above and some below the state goals. And so you should look and see where you're at in comparison to us and be consistent in showing that you're going to continue to help us achieve our goals. Because ultimately, while we are concerned that all of you are achieving your goals, it's a financial hit if the state doesn't meet its goals, and that financial fiscal information are things we put out in our statewide activities, all those additional grants that we find additional money with. If we lose that money, a lot of those other activities and those other grants that you applied for won't be available to you. So we want to make sure we continue to reach our goals through all of your efforts. We'll move on to the next one here. Now it seems like it's working. We'll look at a youth example. In this one, both the actual and the negotiated are lower than the simulated. And in one case, quite a bit when you look at the actual compared to that simulated. So again, the converse of what I just said from your perspective, we're not going to look at the simulated performance and say, well, it says 62%, so we need to negotiate up to 62%. We're going to want to look at all of the factors, all of the information we have available, just as you do, and determine where we think you should be in that negotiation. And so you'll come in somewhere maybe around the 50-52 if you think that's reasonable. Looking at the history, this history kind of has had some ups and downs, but thankfully in the last couple of years, it's come back up. So again, use that to your advantage in submitting the proposals and entering into negotiations with us. I do want to make a note when you look at this bottom actuals set of data, 2023 doesn't appear in the tool. I created that just to show kind of an example of what 23 might look like. In some cases, I might have made it look higher. I might have made it look lower. So again, wanting to show you that it's a full picture you're wanting to look at when you propose those goals. Again, if you've got any questions as I'm moving along, share those in the chat and I can stop and address them at the time. We're going to move on to the next question. We'll have a couple more simulations appearing after that. So the next question, what does the local negotiation team do when our simulated performance is different than our prior performance outcomes? So I kind of touched on that. And again, it's one of the 4 factors. It could be very close to your history. It might not be. It might be in between your previous negotiation and your actual outcomes, whether it be one side or the other. So just take it into consideration as one of those factors and have that discussion appropriately. So we'll look at a couple other examples where we've got a middle scoring simulated performance. So in here, when we look at the youth again, this one in measurable skill gains, the simulation is higher than your goal from last time, but quite a bit lower than your last full program year outcome, and in fact would be below your most recent completed year that we still have to submit, program year 23. So do we expect that you're going to submit your actuals from the last 2 years at 80+%? Probably not. But do we also expect that you should do it at 55 because that's what you submitted last time around and negotiated to? And I would say probably not either. So again, look at everything you've got in front of you, all the information. We're doing the same thing. And unless you submit additional information in an attachment to the proposals, we're not going to have anything more than what this tool provides us, what we can find in IWDS or what we can find in the iPath system. So we're looking strictly at data unless you provide us something else. And we'll talk about what some of those other factors might be here in a moment. So again, this is just another example of how the actuals, the prior goals, and the simulations don't always align, but it's still information that's useful for you in submitting your goals and negotiating. And then the final simulation or example here is back to the adult 4th quarter employment rate. So we're in the adult program, and in this case, both the actuals and the prior negotiated goals are above the simulated performance. So what does that mean again? Should that mean you should prepare to think you have to submit or can submit low because the simulation says that? And I would say if you look at your history, that simulation is an example of something that's quite low. It's a little bit closer when you look at the youth example in the same quarter 4 employment rate, where we're only less than 3 points off, 3 percentage points off between both the PY22 actual and the goals you set or this LWIA would have set back in 22-23. So that's an example where the simulation might be really close to what you want to submit in your proposal form. You did it, this WIOA would have come up in 23, so maybe you want to come up a little bit from that simulation to reflect that. But again, that's part of your thinking, and we'll work with you in the negotiation call to come to some kind of an agreement that we can both be happy about. One thing I will say, as we receive these proposals, and I probably should have thrown an extra slide, and I'll put this in the Q&A since it's not in the slide. When you're thinking about submitting goals, think in tenths of a percentage or tenths of a decimal, not 2 digits out or 3 digits out. Some of the data, when you do some mathematics, some averages and things like that, you might get a second or third decimal point out, but that would be very difficult to negotiate to that level of specificity. So we ask that you prepare to submit only rates that are with one number after the decimal point, as these are shown. We round everything up when we're doing performance or down accordingly. And so we ask that you submit only one decimal. We prefer, although we're not going to hold anyone to this, if in negotiations you feel like that your appropriate goal, and we can come to agreement, is, let's say, 70.2 rather than 70 or 70.5. We prefer zeros and fives only because it makes it a little bit easier for us to look at these, and we aren't seeing a lot of different numbers after the decimal point. But that's not one Paul and I or our team here at the state are going to harp too harshly about. So if you want to prepare your proposals at let's say 70.4, go ahead and do that. If you want to negotiate to 70.4 and we can't agree that 70.5 is good enough or 70.0 is good enough, then we'll be fine. We're not going to push that issue, but we do ask that you keep them to one decimal point for ease of our system accepting the data and as well as the negotiation itself. All right, we're going to move on to the 4 factors of negotiation. We mentioned these. This is directly from our Q&A from our prior July 31st webinar and previous webinars. There are 4 factors, and 3 of these 4 will be found in that tool. You'll be able to find the local levels compared to other similar local area outcomes, because you can go into that tool and you can select multiple LWIAs when you look at the historical data. So maybe you're in LWIA 20 and you want to see how 21 or 15 have performed, because they're very similar to your economic situation and very close to your area geographically. You can go in there and look at them, and you can see how they have historically compared, so that you might be able to say, we think we should be closer to them than we've done in the past, whether that be higher or lower, because we think we do have some similarities. The tool itself is one of the factors. So obviously that's the second one, that it provides you all the information that's contained within it, with the projections coming from all of the participant characteristics and economic conditions. The third one is consider how you will use the proposed goals to promote continuous improvement. This is the one that doesn't show up in the tool, because this is more a narrative that you'll need to provide us in the proposal. If that's the only thing you have to support your proposed goals, because you think the data itself is not fair to what you're trying to negotiate, please provide us with the reasonings for that. It might be new policies, it might be new processes you're putting in place that you think will affect performance ultimately, but maybe in the short term it might be a little bit lower than you hope for, but no, it will come up over the years, because the reason you put it in is to improve your performance overall. And then the fourth one is comparison of how you can help us. I mentioned that. That's why we put the state goals on each of those tool pages, where you can see your PY22 and the simulated outcomes and the simulated performance. So again, compare that to how you historically compare to the state's performance and goals, and consider that appropriately. What are some examples of that third example I said, or third type of factor? maybe you want to improve your level of performance that you previously attained. So you look at what you've done historically and you think you can do better. Probably the best example of that is in the measurable skill gains. We've done a lot of technical assistance over the last several years. We've invited many of you to join a Region 5, USDOL Region 5 webinar on hearing about measurable skill gains as well as credential attainment rate. And so we continue to learn. We've changed the management information systems to reflect some of the information we've learned from Department of Labor. And so we've found that it's a little bit easier to track some of the MSGs than we knew about in the past. One example is the high school equivalency. We can now track that as an MSG. So we want to make sure that you're taking that into consideration. And if you see that you're on a nice trajectory up over the last 2, 3, 4 years, and you think you can continue that, that's an example of a continuous improvement that we'd love to see in your proposals and negotiation. You might look at the ranking that you have currently, and I'll show you the rankings here in a moment, what I mean by this one, but you might want to move up in the rankings compared to how you historically performed compared to those other LWIAs. I mentioned before, maybe your service strategy or delivery to the participants is changing, and you think that's going to be a positive overall, but it might take a little bit of time. Let us know that and why you think that's going to affect maybe your PY24, but improve over PY25. Again, maybe another approach is changing the intensity or comprehensiveness of how you're serving participants. And you know, maybe you've learned something. Maybe you've heard from some of your cohorts that they're doing some good things. We've been sharing some best practices in webinars recently from some of your local area cohorts. And so maybe you've learned from them and you want to put those into place. But it takes time for that to evolve into really best practices within your own local area. And then you want to, if you're one of our top performing LWIAs as far as outcomes historically in one or more measure, we don't expect for you to negotiate to those top levels, nor do we expect for you to drop considerably into a lower area. But we do expect that you negotiate with that in mind and keep yourself kind of in the top area where you've historically been able to perform. All right, so I talked about the rankings there as one of those factors. And when you see here, we break these down to 4 quartiles. The tool itself doesn't do this. It's probably something we might be able to put into the next iteration of this tool in 2 years. But I've done kind of the quartile breakdown for you here. 4th quartile is the higher level, the top 6 performing outcomes. And so back to my last point, if you're in that quartile, do we expect that you negotiate in this instance of 15.9 thousand for this median earnings rate because that's what you achieved in PY22? That's probably unrealistic, and especially if your history doesn't speak to that except for 1 year. But you should probably be able to negotiate within this same quartile, maybe in the, you know, anywhere from 11, 12 to 13,000 range, depending again what your history is. Moving down is the 3rd quartile. Again, we break this out into 6 local areas. If you're in this area, you might think maybe you're at the 10.4 range where you're at the very top of the quartile. You might want to try to move yourself up into quartile number 4. So you might look and see if it's reasonable to negotiate to 10.7, 10.8, maybe even $11,000 for this median earnings. These will change from program year to program year. We understand that, but as a reference, you can use that as your support for why you're negotiating what it is. And then on down to the 2nd and 1st quartiles, which hold only 5 of the LWIAs in each. And if you're in one of these local areas, really highly consider if there's a possibility you can negotiate because you think you can perform at a higher level, where you move yourself out of one of these quartiles into the next quartile above it. Or certainly at least within your quartile, you move up to a higher level. So hopefully that's understandable what we're saying when we ask for your quartile rankings to come up. Another question that we had in our previous Q&A document is, what is the need for and importance of submitting that additional data in attachments to the performance goals? And here's some examples of why we want to know that. we don't know any of the narrative that you might have. We don't know what you're doing in your local area, although we are communicating with the regional managers, so they are giving us some information, some insight of what might be going on in your local area. Good example today in LWIA 7, we understand you have a migrant influx situation. And while the statistical adjustment model will capture that effect after the program year, you still might want to make sure you let us know that you think that's a consideration that you're taking when you're making your proposal. We need to have this information to make objective decisions as to what we think your goals should be, so that when we get into negotiations, we have as small a gap as possible. And in some cases, as all of you have probably seen, we accept some of your proposals because we do see that information. We do think kind of along the same way as you do in your proposal, and we end up landing in nearly the same, if not the identical proposal area. And when we get in negotiation, there's one or more of the goals we don't even have to discuss because we're going to accept what you provided us, but we need that support so we understand where you're coming from. It allows for a much easier negotiation. We have 15 goals, and in fact, with this round of negotiations, we may have as many as 30 because I mentioned in the webinar, and I've already mentioned and seen in some of the proposals coming into us, people are looking at that continuous improvement, and they're submitting one goal in PY 24 and a little bit higher goal in PY 25 because they understand and they know and they expect that they're going to have a little bit higher outcomes in the second year of these negotiations. We negotiated higher in 5 or 6 measures with Department of Labor. They were credential attainment rate and measurable skill gains. I don't think we did that in any of the employment goals. That doesn't say that you can't do that. You can certainly propose a higher level in program year 25 than 24 if you think that's reasonable. And again, if you're going to do that, try to provide us as much information and an explanation as to why you're doing that as possible. Otherwise, we enter that negotiation call kind of without a sense of why you propose what you have. So, we want to have as much as we can so we can get through these in a 2-hour frame. A lot of these will go smoothly and conclude within an hour, but with 15 and now 30 goals over the 2 years, we may take the 2 hours on some of your calls. So give us that information up front so we can be prepared as possible. And finally, it just removes speculation from us trying to think why you're proposing what you do. Just tell us why you're making those proposals. Make it clear to us. All right, Antonio, do you have a poll ready for before we turn this over to Paula?
I do
I'm going
have
to
the
take
poll
while
ready.
you're preparing that poll. Wait, Antonio, does anyone? I know I haven't seen any questions in the chat. I hope that means that we're kind of clear in helping with some of these tips that we gave today on your proposals and on your negotiations. But if anyone wants to open up their phone line and ask a question, maybe they're more comfortable doing that than typing in chat or type something in chat. I'd like to take a moment to give you time to do that now before we move on to a different topic. Or someone just let us know that this is great information and you appreciate it and you're more prepared than you were before. Anyone that submitted proposals already or have them and ready to submit, if you want to, do you have any tips you can give your fellow local area performance and negotiation teams that you'd like to share as to how you came about developing your proposed goals? Like I said, we've received a handful of these, so if any of you have submitted them or you're pretty close to submitting them and like to share some of your tips, we'd love to hear from you. Quite the quiet group today. That's unusual for all of you. We love to hear from you. You always have some great information. All right, great. Cindy said she did pick up some tips. And continue to send us questions through email if you are stuck on trying to decide on what you submit. We can't necessarily negotiate through through email, but we certainly can help you understand where we're coming from, what we're looking at, so that you have a better sense of maybe where you think we might land in the negotiation. And one thing I'll say, I mentioned maybe in the last quarterly office hours that Congress is going through a process, both in the House and Senate, of reauthorizing WIOA. Each has their own kind of bill. There's a lot of similarities, but there's some differences too. We don't know where they're at as far as, or how I should say, how they're going to progress coming up on an election. But certainly, if the election kind of keeps the same party intact, we probably will see some reauthorization from these bills go into effect in the next year, if not sooner. So one thing they are proposing, and we don't know how this will trickle down to local negotiations, but they're going to lean, they're really trusting these negotiation tools they've developed, the statistical adjustment model. And one of the proposals is that the negotiation will kind of be based on the tool itself. We've got some reservations on that locally, I would think, because as we showed you in some of those examples, the actual simulations don't seem to line up always with the recent history. So it'd be interesting to see if that goes through. We'll certainly be sharing our thoughts on that if they ever come out with a proposal. But just to let you know that there's discussions out there on a different methodology to doing negotiations at the state level that may or may not affect how we do negotiations with you in the future. Those wouldn't probably go into effect until, 26, 27. Well, probably not even then, probably 28, 29 negotiations, because by the time they get a bill out, get it in place, and then have to implement it, it's going to be quite a ways down the road. So several years before we would see that kind of change, but something to consider. And if you see that there's a proposal out there and have some thoughts locally, we'll certainly be looking to all of you to help us develop responses in a public comment session. All right, with no other additional questions coming in, I appreciate you listening. I'm going to turn it over to Paula for the next couple of slides. Paula?
Good afternoon, everyone. So today, all I'm going to talk about is wanting to make everyone aware that we have WIOA professional development emails that you can register for, and there's a few different components as far as reminders within these. So we have a quick poll to get an idea of who all is aware and utilizing this type of information in marketing. So Antonio, will you pull up the poll?
Absolutely can.
Thank you. It's not to put anyone on the spot. Just be honest. We understand. So please check the most appropriate response regarding the WIOA Workforce Professional Development announcements. I have got a lot of big screen in the background of this. So I rarely read information contained in the emails, and you are aware, but didn't know that there were policy tips included, if ever. The policy tips, by the way, are only included once a week on a Monday. I attend WIOA Wednesday webinars regularly and always read the policy tips each month. I'm not even subscribed to receive the emails. How can I register? I'll give it just one more minute. Okay, I think that's it for responses. So only a few of you, only one indicated that you rarely read the information in the emails. 38% didn't know there were policy tips included. So the policy tips are towards the bottom. I'm pretty sure that because I had to scroll one time. So it's Kickstart Your Policy, and those are the policy tips. And policy has, each month, it's kind of a theme. So in August, well, here, I'll go finish the poll. And 17 of 29, 59% do regularly read attend the webinars. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing this. webinars and also read the policy tips each month. So that's great. And no one is not subscribed to receive the emails and needing registered. So that is a good thing. So anyway, with what I was saying, just we have a theme of some policy tips each month. Last month, it was around performance. This month in August, July 24th, it was performance and more focused on measures. In August, with the closeout of program year 23, and we're finalizing our outcomes for the annual report, policy just decided to focus on reporting, and a lot of it is really tied to performance and compliance. So the first tip, we provided a checklist, and by the way, I see all the participants and I'm familiar with almost 100% of you, and knowing that you are aware of these policies and how to comply in the reports, but maybe it would be helpful even to send the checklist to your frontline staff. So there was a little checklist provided there, basic, high level. So do you need to please end your services? Are there any service records that staff might have got behind and didn't get added or need to close because they were waiting on a status? Little things like that happens with case management and career planning. Then especially, do you have all the measurable skill gain types entered that apply to any of your participants? Any credentials out there that you know a participant received? You just need to data entry those. Then, not most importantly, but very importantly, and I sound like a broken record, but it's the exits that have gone past the 90 days and the grace period. So you need to ask us to exit for you. Please do while there's still time. This is just reiterated again by DOL Region 5. It's the #1 factor in accurate reporting of all your participants, everything you do, and your performance. So please check that out. I just want to take this time to note, it was mentioned in a policy tip for those who read it. If not, please utilize the IWDS or Career Connect exit reports. In IWDS, it's the days since last active service that you'll want to run here in the ending weeks of our program year. In IPATS, there are last active service greater than 60 days, 90 days, 110 days rows. Those are undergoing some edits, some updates and enhancements. So please stick with the IWDS report. All of the other rows are accurate and reliable. It's just those 3 rows that we need to enhance. So please use Career Connector IWDS for exits at the moment. The next week, we went a little further and we reintroduced utilizing IPATS for performance tracking and compliance. We highlighted some fields that you can use to possibly close the gap in some performance outcomes. Those rows were highlighted. If it would help, I can pull up the dashboard, but if you go back to your policy tips, we specifically outlined all of the sections and those rows. It included the sections called customer engagement, and that's for closing services. And then we have rows called performance training indicators, and those hone in on any skill gains or credentials that you do or do not have, or maybe you have them and haven't documented them. And there are specific counts, and you can see a listing there too. So please check those out. If you're looking at your performance and you see a rate look a little light, when you know you're probably performing better because you know your participants. So when we get down to the August 19th tip, it was exiters qualifying for performance. I just want to point this out quickly because there's a row here that indicates other post-exit outcomes. So these are like when you don't have a wage match, but DOL allows other outcomes like supplemental data, military counts, registered apprenticeship enrollment, For youth, you have those post-secondary education outcomes that will count for youth employment. So we just wanted to point this out as a policy tip because we think if you can identify some of those outcomes, you might be able to close the gap, increase performance outcomes just a little, improve your rank, use that information for negotiation, substantiation, or anything like that. So just want to make everyone aware that sometimes the policy tips are related to performance as well. Then the next tip is going to be on August 26th, and this is going to touch on data validation and accuracy reliability. So please check that out because that'll be our next topic. And are there any questions while we have time on any of the IPATS dashboard rows? Any of you who read the tips, if anything was confusing, perfect time to clarify that for everyone. Or any questions about how those rows are working? There was a lot of information in the tips. I went through it pretty quick for time's sake.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions related to the tips. So appreciate the input in the poll. And if you've got any recommendations for us that you want to provide today in the chat, open up your phone line or email us later to make those more prominent, more useful, please let us know. We coordinate with Laura to get all those policy tips out each month. The majority of those aren't really related to performance reporting, so she's working with other units within OET to put information out. So we can share it with Laura if you think there's something else that we can do to make sure everyone's seeing those and getting the information that you all need to administer your programs effectively. We've got a few more minutes, and again, if you've got questions for Paula, please do. We had another question about the timeline. All the proposed goal forms should be submitted to us by September 6th. However, if you're struggling to meet that date, let us know ahead of time once you can identify that maybe that's going to be difficult to meet because you're waiting on signatures. Maybe you've had some people that were on vacation and you're waiting for them to get back to really do your full discussions and determinations. Just let us know so we can work with you. Maybe we can answer any questions you need, give you some assistance that you might need, so we can get those in as soon as possible. As I mentioned in the chat, as we're getting these in, we review them, and if we think they're complete, we send out available dates and times that remain through September, September 26th. And so the longer it takes for an LWIA to submit their proposed goals, the less dates and times will be available. So we want you to try and get those in as soon as possible so you can have more flexibility in scheduling those. We also had a question about, I'm going to pull over the good old e-policy that Laura Dom maintains. I'm going to pull that over just to remind people how to navigate around. So if you go to e-policy, you can get this from the main Illinois WorkNet site. There is the reason I didn't put a link in the chat, actually two reasons, Amy, is when you go to a section of the policy, and so you'll see all the large chapters here. We've got our own for performance. You'll see within that, you can open these arrows and you can see the main paragraphs within those and subparagraphs within those and et cetera. So for negotiations, if you look at this section, we'll go down here to local negotiations. The way this platform is set up, I could give you this link today and you'll see it up here that I just highlighted. But 207 is if this whole e-policy were laid out in a paper format, a huge manual type format, this would be page 207. And as we add or remove or change policy within this entire document, that number will change. So today, this policy might be referenced at 207, and tomorrow it might not if we have some kind of change. So we try to resist sharing links to policies directly and just send you to e-policy, and hopefully we've done enough technical assistance to get you to maneuver around. So I showed you how to get to the policy related to negotiations. And then the second part of that is all these documents here over on the right, whether it be technical assistance documents, which here you'll see we put the Q&A document, so you can go here and select this, download it, and look at all the questions. There's, I think, somewhere around 20 or 30 now in this document. We might be adding a couple more. We always follow with the most recent date, so if you want to come back later, you'll be able to see if anything's been updated since that July 31st date. But these documents can't be linked. It's just not the way it's set up. Now, the policy references can be. You see that we give you DOL documents, so you will see links here. But the documents themselves, and one example is the notice. This is a separate notice you have to download to get. I can't give you a link that gets you to that download. So you'll need to come to this policy, open it up, and then go over to the right under notices. And then the forms are here as well, Amy, and anyone else looking for forms. And because of the signatures required for you in local area 7, Amy, you have your own separate one. I think I sent this to you a couple of weeks ago, but I'll follow up with you again with this because I wanted to talk to you separately. Kelly, our regional manager, indicated you maybe wanted to have a conversation. So I'll reach out to you, Amy, and we'll make sure that you have the appropriate form. But everyone else uses the primary form up above without LWIA 7 on the extension of the title of it. Download this, fill it in, scan it back, and send it to us via email is really the process. And again, we'd like to see those by September 6th, so we still have 2 to 3 weeks to try to get these scheduled. All right, what do we have? Question. I saw Michelle, when policy updates are released, would it be possible to have any significant changes or updates included in the body? I thought Laura did that to an extent, but we'll talk to Laura and see how she can draft that email to maybe highlight some of the major parts of a policy update. I certainly understand your concern there. So we'll share that. Yeah, so again, Amy, I'll send you that. We'll work with you to get your form. Okay, then in regards to the effectiveness in serving employers policy update released yesterday. So this is a state policy, meaning only the state will negotiate eventually and report on this. There's no requirement that local areas have to do any kind of reporting for effectiveness in serving employers. However, the data that we use to submit, and we coordinate this with all 4 core programs, and in fact, Title III at IDS submits this on behalf of the state. All the data we submit, or at least some of the data we submit, I'm not familiar with every bit of the data, comes from what you as a program is submitting in IWDS or Career Connect. So while there's not a direct responsibility to effectiveness in serving employers at the local level, there's reporting requirements that feed up to that. And I think that is in paragraph 5 of the policy. If you'll look at that, in fact, you know what? If I can get back to it real quick, we'll take a quick look at it. Let's pull this back over. All right, so we're back over here. Everyone seeing my screen? We're going to scroll down to performance again. The new section she just updated. Is under primary indicators of performance, effectiveness in serving employers. So if you open that up, so this is considered policy 3.16, chapter 3, paragraph 1, subparagraph 6. You scroll down, and I just remember from looking at this, under 5, we talked kind of briefly about that, in that you want to make sure that you're inputting all of your information. I'm sorry, item 6 here. We want to make sure all the boards, all our programs are submitting, reporting participant information accurately and timely, so that when we run our report to give to Sergio and the others at IDS to compile into one state report that is submitted to Department of Labor, we need to make sure these are all accurate on our behalf. So that's really your only responsibility in this policy at this point in time. I don't see on the horizon a local policy that would require anything more from local areas or any of our stakeholders or grantees. But that doesn't mean as we get additional guidance from Department of Labor that maybe that won't change. But at this point in time, I don't see that. I don't, again, Michelle, I'm not familiar fully with that report. I haven't looked at it since last year when we submitted it, to be honest with you. So I don't know what all goes into it to know about wages, but certainly we want you to have your wage information in the system anyway, because that affects your outcomes. And then if it's utilized in the effectiveness in serving employers, and I believe it does, because I think it's capturing retention. And what that means is if someone's employed in the second quarter after exit, are they still employed with the same employer in the fourth quarter after exit? So it's important to have your employment information in so that can be captured. Now, a lot of that is done by IDS, by wage matches and things of that nature. But if we don't have that participant in, and especially if we don't have them in quarter two, they will never make it in quarter four for that report. So it's important to get that in timely fashion in that regard. All right. Madonna, thanks for sharing some information with Amy, and I see that Paula's provided a little information on what we can do from the Pearl. One other thing is there's a Federal Register out on the Pearl and asking for input in case they want to update it. It's actually the ICR that dictates what's in the Pearl. If you can find that, maybe we'll send a link to Karen Allen. You'll all want to take a look at that. One thing I think we're going to do at the state level is address a concern many of you had locally, in that right now, all we can report as far as barriers to employment are those that occur or exist at program entry. That's how the Pearl is written. We talked to our region today in a call, and they're not in a position to do anything, but they said we should be submitting our comments in response to that proposed rule, and state that we want captured any barriers that the individual, the participant has throughout participation. The example being, let's say a female participant comes into the program, she's single, she's not married, has no kids, and then she becomes pregnant. Right now, we can't submit that as a barrier to employment, but we know you at the local level have to address that into developing their career plan or their individual service strategy. So we're going to submit a comment to that. You can all certainly submit comments as well. And if you see any other ones, let us know what you're going to submit, because strength of message is important when we're doing this, and it might be something that we at the state want to submit in conjunction with whatever you at the local level think should be submitted as far as changes. So take a look at that. We'll have Paula, I'll send Karen and Lori with the task force link to the Federal Register. I think we've still got another 30 days or so to submit comments. They gave 60 days, and this came out in July. So something to think about. We hope we can help you out. We do recognize you're providing the time and the services to those individuals, even if they didn't have the barrier or the challenge at entry. What you can do, however, is if a barrier is not known when they walk into the program and are determined eligible and are enrolled, but you find out later they had it at time of entry. One example is the youth individual who doesn't want to open up to their career planner until they've worked with them for a while. And after a few weeks or a month working with them, they finally say, hey, I understand that this might be an issue in me getting further education or getting employed. I'd like to point out that I have a record or whatever it is. And then you'd have to ask, when did you have that? And if it was prior to entry, then you can submit that in IWDS, and it will be submitted in the follow-up next report that we submit to DOL. So don't ignore it if you find out later, especially if it's occurring at program entry. But hopefully we can get that changed to where we can get recognition and get counted for all barriers that participants have existing throughout their participation, as well as when they enter the program. Cindy has a question. Is there some place to get clarification of what counts as a credential, what counts as an MSG? Can something be counted as both? And are they different but adult and youth? We might want to have a side conversation, Cindy. We've done a lot of, and this isn't, putting away, there's a lot of confusing information sometimes. Sometimes we've had a little bit of conflicting information. I'll admit to that, in the guidance that we get and maybe what we put out. We've done a lot of webinars on this. We invited local areas to participate in a Region 5 webinar a couple months ago, maybe only a month ago, that Teresa Tice presented with a lot of good information, and those that were able to attend asked a lot of good questions. We can continue to provide technical assistance to all of you, but Cindy, if you think you would like to have some one-on-one assistance, we can certainly coordinate something of that nature to help you, because we did address some of those items that you mentioned as far as credentials and MSG, and no, a credential doesn't mean it's MSG, and vice versa. Just because you have an MSG doesn't mean you have a credential. But one thing that they made clear is these should be coming closer together. If you're getting a credential, if you're completing training, it's pretty obvious you should have an MSG. I've mentioned that in some of our webinars. I'd ask what the value of a training program is if I can't capture one or more MSGs throughout a participant's enrollment and participation in that training program. She gave, and we've given you a lot of examples of how you do that if they enroll the program late in a program year. Let's say they're entering a summer school class and it starts June 15th. We've given a little bit of guidance on how you can capture an MSG in those short few days or weeks before the end of the program year. So again, reach out. We mentioned there's, that all these webinars are recorded. Make sure you're going out to those sites and checking our old information, not old as outdated, but our old information from those webinars that we've done in the past. And again, Cindy, we can talk with you and anyone else if you've got questions. Let us know. We have a technical assistance performance work group that helps us develop all those webinars and some of the other materials that we share in policy. We're going to continue to work with them, so we'll have them help us identify other ways that are more effective or how we can share the message to all of you and keep it up to date, keep all of you up to date with this information. Paula, I don't know if you want to share anything more at this time without going into what we've already provided in the training.
No, thank you though. Okay,
great. Yeah, great questions. Just want to keep focused today on what we had at hand, and we'll go through that. One thing that we will do in the future that's part of the package of performances is if somebody is struggling to meet a goal or barely meeting a goal, and we see that, we'll reach out to you. If they see that, if any of you see that, please reach out to us and we'll give you some one-on-one technical assistance to help you get count for what you've done. We want to make sure everyone is getting credit for all the hard work you're doing. You're doing great things. People are getting employed, getting good wages. And we want to make sure we're getting credit for that at the local level, but also at the state level. So reach out to us if you need to. We're always here, available. Bear with us a little bit in these next 5 weeks, as you can imagine, trying to prepare for and conduct 22 negotiations. Paul and I will be running a little bit rampant for a little while, so it might take us a little bit of time to get back to you, but we certainly will get back to you in a short amount of time. I think that's all we have to share today. If there's no final questions, we can let you have half an hour back of your time. We appreciate you participating, all your input, all your questions. Again, we'll look at these questions we had in this PowerPoint and see how we can update the Q&A document to reflect some of the information we shared today. So if you haven't gone to there now, look for the 731 version, but maybe if you go there in a few days, maybe in a week or so, we'll get an update to that. You'll be able to see some of those other ones. Got another question. So in LWIA or Crystal's LWIA, our board wanted to know if the same would be applied to PY23 outcomes. No. Two things with PY23 outcomes. One is because we didn't have a negotiation tool built off a statistical adjustment model. We were informed that we could not apply a statistical adjustment model to any program year without that as part of the negotiation. So we did not have that tool created prior to these negotiations. So what we've done in PY 21 and 22 is assess you kind of the old school way, just simply the outcomes compared to your negotiated goals without any statistical adjustment model or SAM adjustments. We'll be doing that again once we get all of these in. We do like to wait a little bit of time after completion of the year and after reporting to submit those and issue those to all of you in case there's some guidance changes from Department of Labor as they're finalizing state assessments. So we appreciate your patience in waiting for those. You can pretty much go out and see your outcomes as they're final in IWDS or IPATS somewhere in October, even in November. Everything should be updated as final. We just won't put out a formal assessment until until we hear from DOL to make sure something doesn't change. From a state perspective, they are not assessing measurable skill gain again in PY 23. They're still waiting for verifiable and accurate and current data on that. So they did send a technical employment notice out a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even last week, indicating that they will not be assessing states on that measure. We are looking at all of your measures. What we submitted in assessments the last 2 years is for all of them, simply because we're not doing the statistical adjustment model. So that's our thought going into PY 23 again. And no, Crystal, we don't even have a SAM. We've been focused on developing this tool. So we can't even give you like a simulated SAM outcome or adjustment. Now, I guess that's a good question for NIU to say if they're still building the SAM. When would they have that available? I'm not sure they'll have it available to apply after PY 23 to give you a sense of what that might look like. But I don't want to speak for them. I'll ask them if that's different and we can give you some kind of simulations of adjustments. We might, do that for an informational purposes. But certainly they'll have the SAM finalized, working with that technical assistance work group that they lead by the end of program year 24 to apply, because at that point we will need to do that. Any final questions? All right, we're going to let you have the rest of your afternoon back, and appreciate you joining us again. Our next office hours, if you'll get this on your schedule, will be November 20th. Same time, 1 o'clock till 2:30. And we'll determine, working with our work groups, what the topics should be at that point in time. We've been focusing a lot on negotiations the last two quarters. We won't have to do that, so maybe we'll have something additional to share with you on performance, the indicators of performance, or any new policy that maybe we have implemented. So have a great day, and we look forward to hearing from all of you and your proposed goals and conducting of those negotiations in the next several weeks. Thank you.